Come on, come with me, let's go. Welcome to Havana, Cuba. This is From the Sanctioned Seat. In this episode, I want to break down what compliance actually means. What are travel operators responsible for? What are individual travelers responsible for? And what are the expectations that the OFAC CACRs have of Cuba travel? So let's take a look at that. My name is Melissa Rivière. I'm an anthropologist and a sanctions. My name is Melissa Rivière. I'm an anthropologist and a certified sanctions specialist. I'm also the director of Son Dos Alas, an agency that is dedicated to educational travel to Cuba. I'm here to unpackage U.S.-Cuba sanctions to better understand legal travel to Cuba. This is From the Sanctioned Seat. Why? Because it's very much these cars that represent U.S.-Cuba policy, because it's these cars that stay on the roads today, that cover the streets in Havana and throughout Cuba, that really are the evidence of U.S. sanctions. So these have become not only relics of the past, but they've also become the evidence of U.S.-Cuba sanctions policy. And of course, what U.S. travelers aren't dying to ride in one of these classic cars when they come to Havana. So I think it's the perfect seat from which we should talk about sanctions. So join me as we unpackage sanctions to better understand legal travel to Cuba. Compliance hinges on four primary aspects. These are what you do, why you do it, how it's documented, and how your records substantiate that. So let's look at that a little bit more. What you do. This means your specific activities that you engage in under your authorized category, as defined by the regulations, educational exchanges, professional meetings, etc. The why you do it. This is the purpose of your travel. This is the category that you've selected for your travel and the specific purpose of travel, which means what is the licensed or exempt purpose under the OFAC CACRs. How it's documented. That's really important. How is your activity documented? Through itineraries, through contracts, through syllabi, through agendas, through communications, receipts, correspondence, everything that shows that your activity actually matched the category that you traveled under. And fourth, whether your records substantiate your authorization, meaning that if you're audited, your files can independently demonstrate which activities you partook in, and the document can stand on its own without the need for explanation or interpretation. If your activities and your records clearly align with the regulation and the authorization under which you traveled, then you are compliant. A specific license, by contrast, is an individualized authorization that's issued by OFAC for activities that are not otherwise authorized under the general license. Here's the key point that many people miss. If an activity is already authorized under the general license, OFAC does not authorize a specific license for that activity because it's already permitted. Specific licenses are not safer, they're not workarounds, and they're not a backup. They exist only for activities that are not already authorized under the general license. OFAC compliance means that your activities while you're in Cuba fit within what U.S. sanctioned regulations explicitly allow you to do, and that you can prove what you did on paper, not just telling anecdotes. First of all, tourism is not allowed in Cuba. But what is tourism? Tourism is a solely pleasure-seeking activity. It's leisure for the sake of leisure. And OFAC does not pre-approve most travel. As we already discussed, there's no permit that you apply for. Instead, OFAC regulates it after the fact, through audits, enforcement actions, documentation reviews. That means that your compliance lies in itineraries, activity logs, contracts, bank records, receipts, emails, correspondence, invoices, and your internal controls. People assume that legality requires prior approval, but under Cuba sanctions, it doesn't work that way. Compliance is demonstrated through how the trip is structured, what activities take place, and whether your documentation supports the authorized use. OFAC expects travelers and institutions to assess their eligibility before traveling and to be able to demonstrate it afterwards. If you're traveling under an authorized category, you do not need to apply for an OFAC license, You do not receive any special permit, and you do not get any kind of advance confirmation. Your compliance lives within your records. That can feel a little bit uncomfortable for institutions that are used to permission based systems, but it's how the Cuban sanctions regimes work and how they function. If your activity is authorized under the general license, OFAC will not issue you a specific license because the law already allows it. One of the most misunderstood requirements is the idea of a substantive activity. Authorized travel categories are not labels, they're standards. For example, educational travel must involve structured learning. Professional research and professional meeting must be tied to a defined field or a defined discipline. And support for the Cuban people must be meaningful exchanges and benefit non state actors. Leisure, wrapped in a category, is still leisure. OFAC compliance depends on substantive activity, taken contextually, not by a checklist. You want to make sure that your itinerary can be reviewed as a whole, and that the nature of your scheduled engagements all have to do with the purpose of your travel. That the proportion of time that you've devoted, the majority of the time of your travel, is dedicated to that authorized activity, and whether documentation supports the stated purpose. A single meeting does not define compliance. A sustained pattern of activity does. And most travelers are not allowed to have free time on their own, but must fulfill a full time itinerary of activities that comply with the authorization and the category they've selected to travel under. Substantive activity means that your time in Cuba is meaningful and demonstrably devoted to the purpose that makes your travel legal. Not incidentally, not symbolically, but in practice. Most violations come from informal travel that's dressed up as compliance. Some people assume, well, I went to a lecture, or I met a local, or I supported a local business. But OFAC evaluates patterns, not anecdotes, and compliance is cumulative, it's contextual, and it's assessed holistically. This is where the role of professional travel operators really matters. Because when programs are structured properly, individual travelers are not left to have to improvise. Experienced travel operators need to make the designs of their programs well in advance. They need to be well articulated into their itineraries. They need to be implemented on the ground through your guides, through your speakers, your vendors, your lectures. All of this needs to be integrated into one purpose for travel. And you need to have systematic documentation. So I often recommend to US travelers not to use a foreign travel operator because the foreign travel operator is not obligated to work under US sanctions, but the travelers are. So I strongly recommend US travelers to go through a US based educational travel company like Son Dos Alas. So let me clarify. I am not a lawyer and I don't work for OFAC. I'm a certified sanctions specialist that is founded and directs an educational travel company for legal OFAC compliant travel to Cuba. Compliance is not about avoiding enforcement. It's about understanding the rules well enough to feel confident operating within them. Now let's take our key takeaways for today. Travel to Cuba is legal, but it's not casual. It's administrative, it's operational, and quite honestly, it's complex. Until our next episode, I'm Melissa Rivière, and this is From the Sanctioned Seat. A ver, Misael, contame un poquito de este carro. Contame de qué año es, cuál es el modelo y algunas cosas especiales, de qué tipo de motor tiene.
Es un Pontiac 54, es el modelo que le siguió al más famoso que fue el H. Este es el gran jefe indio y nada, tiene un motor de Mercedes-Benz con su transmisión automática. Está recién salido de pintura, todo hecho al detalle, como buen cubano.
Me imagino que no tiene el motor original porque ese motor no se encuentra. Cuéntame un poquito de eso, cómo se empata un motor Mercedes-Benz con un carro clásico antiguo así.
Se hace con mucho talento cubano.
¿Podemos abrir el capó y mirar un poquito? ¿Me puedes dar un tour? A ver, cuéntame, ¿qué tenemos aquí?
Tiene un Mercedes 5 cilindros coreano. Aquí lo dice bien la tapa arriba, San John.
Que es
Y
coreano.
trae coreano, sí, coreano. Y trae todos sus accesorios de fábrica, sus bocinas de claxon, un radiador moderno, pero el de fábrica de él, de factoría. Y todo funcional perfectamente.
A ver, la transmisión es también, ¿es original o es
Es de
también?
Mercedes, automática, de 4 marchas. Y tiene también la barra de transmisión, también es Mercedes Benz.
¿Y qué parte de este carro diríamos que sigue siendo original?
La dirección, el diferencial, sus hojas de muelle y toda la carrocería. Tanto original que está en el club, como verás en el parabrisas.
Ajá,
Pertenece a un club
sí.
de autos que están bastante sobre lo impecable.
Y adentro, cuéntame un poquito de cómo está adentro, cómo lo tenés mantenido adentro, el tapiz que tiene adentro.
Tiene recién tapizado, es un crema con unos filos dorados, en conjunto con todo el carro que es dorado y todo hecho con un nylon.
Muchos de estos carros, o sea, se cambian de color, se le hace una chapistería, se le hace un cambio de identidad un poco. ¿Me puedes contar de eso? Porque sé que has tenido
Este,
experiencia cambiándole
sí,
la personalidad.
este le cambié la personalidad completa, pero sí es un carro muy original. Este carro tiene muy pocas detalles, o sea, corregido de lo de fábrica. Tiene casi toda su lata original.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias,
Bueno,
Misael.